Could think about, it's as if millions demonstrating for 50 years and thousands of conferences, including this one, simply didn't exist because nature destruction continues to relentlessly rise. Go ahead. Now, if you want to keep track of destruction of nature, out of which all of us humans, all of our products, and everything else in life are made, then there are only two graphs that you need to look out for. The first is natural resource extraction. That's how much we're really reducing nature. This is 69 to 2019, that's 50 years. And you can see that the curve is going straight up to collapse of civilization. The second one you're familiar with, this is atmospheric greenhouse gases. It's not emissions, it's what's up there in the atmosphere, and that's what causes global warming. You'll notice here for 50 years now that this one, natural resource extraction or nature destruction, has increased almost 4 times. It's just going almost vertical, and that's extremely alarming, right? We're at 97 billion tons, and we're increasing 2.5% per year. This second graph, this is the warming effect up in the atmosphere. It is more than doubled in the last 50 years. That's why we're at 1.1 global warming. We are now at 56 billion tons annually of CO2 EQ, and it's increasing 1.3%. But hang on to your hats, the next phenomenal statistic is that in the next 35 years, that the natural resource extractions and fossil fuel emissions will equal the last 300,000 years. That's the whole time of our Homo sapiens species. 35 years equal 300,000 years. That's the science message that we're headed to collapse. Next slide. Now here are the official slides that I just showed you. These are the real things. First of all, from the International Resource Panel, that's the same curve that you see. It's made up of fossil fuels, which we've got to get rid of. We've got to stop burning them. It's made up of minerals like cement, which we make our buildings with, metals, and biomass. It does not include annual soil loss, which is tens of billions of tons here. And over here, we have the CO2, CH4. These are the greenhouse gases. Now remember, in order to stop climate change, we have to send that graph straight horizontal. And to do that, we have to stop all emissions. All emissions we can't add to the atmosphere, or we have to take them back down. Now, first of all, for sustainable development, how do we solve this problem? This is for the first graph. Remember, the official agreed objective of the United Nations is that we will meet the needs of the present, but we will not compromise future generations for their own needs. And their own needs are natural resources, out of which all of us are made, right? So the best science we have is from IRP, the International Resource Panel, and they have said that if we want to sustain, then all of our nations must reduce resource consumption to 7 tons per capita per year by 2050, right? All of our nations have to. So that Spain, for example, currently the average per capita extraction of natural resources or destruction of nature by the Swedes is 24 tons per year. You can see that's far in excess of 7 tons. So it's increasing 2%. It's not going down at all. So by science, the Swedes, and they're just an example, should be dropping resource consumption 4% per year. Next slide. Now, how do we solve climate change? That's the second graph, right? There are the emissions up there. Remember, the official objective of UNFCCC is to stabilize atmospheric concentrations of greenhouse gas so we don't exceed 2C or 1.5. Now again, the science limit from IPCC is that if we want to go for 2C, then we can only we can only emit 117 tons now to 2100. That's it. Or if we want to go for 1.5C, we can only emit 32 tons per capita by 2100. That's very, very small. Remember, this does not include overshoot, and it does not include negative emissions, which we really don't know how to do. So we go to Sweden again as the example. Sweden currently emits annually an average of 7 tons per year per person. This is far over the limit. You can just see in a couple of years, they will blow through their allotments, so to speak, for emissions for 1.5. So Swedes are not decreasing their emissions. Isn't that amazing, right? With Greta and everybody else, Sweden is not decreasing their emissions. The Swedish government put out their latest report, and they're actually increasing, right? So therefore, for 2C, Swedes should reduce their emissions by law, that's the whole country, 6%. And if they want to go for 1.5C, that means that Sweden should drop it 21% per year. We'll get to how they can do that in a minute. Next slide. Now, here we have the Science Academy President of Sweden and the Science Academy President of Tanzania. The person who does all the work on these statistics is Dr. Birgit van Münster right here. Birgit spent 25 years in Tanzania and Zambia. This is a friend of hers, Esther. She's the first woman doctor in Tanzania. And they're telling you, here's what we've got to do. Now look at the dramatic difference. While Sweden has to cut consumption 4%, cut CO2 6%, 21% for 1.5, look at Tanzania. They have such small emissions that they can increase consumption 5%, increase CO2 3% for 2C, and increase 1% for 1.5, right? Next slide. Now, up on our website, you can either go to collapsestop.org or Our Future Uncompromised, and you can find all the parties here, 197 governments, all the statistics that are behind these reductions. So, for example, comparing Sweden and Tanzania, why in life expectancy, the Swedes live almost 20 years more than the Tanzanians. In education, they have almost twice the education. And in income, look at that, they have 25, 26 times the income. And the wealth, 200 times the wealth, and so forth. Now, if you get down to natural resource consumption, you can see it's basically 20 times to 1. Each Tanzanian consumes an average of 1/20th the resources that the Swedes do. Swedes, by the way, are very typical of Europe, of the EU, and therefore now you get to average lifetime consumption. That is the average life that a Swede lives compared to the average life that a Tanzanian lives. Look at the consumption. It goes from 2,000 for the Swedes to 93 for the Tanzanians. And that's how we come to this calculation here, right? That the Swedes should reduce and the Tanzanians should increase. If we go to emissions, you can see that this is really dramatic, that the Tanzanians emit only 0.2, the Swedes do 7.3. If you do the math, that's 36 times the emissions. And therefore, it really doesn't make any sense to say, everybody cut your emissions 50% by 2030 or 7.6% each year. It doesn't make any sense. Remember Esther, she's a scientist. They have really good scientists in every country around the world, including Tanzania. Those scientists are telling their governments what the facts are. So even though we can talk about this, behind the scenes, the scientists tell the politicians what's going on, and they won't reduce. So we can go on to the next slide. These are simply a repeat. I urge you to go to the website, get the 197 nations. All the details are there. Now, Esther is reminding us of a very, very important point, and that is that it takes laws here. Esther is pointing out that very few Tanzanians fly, right? Very, very few. But if we caught all flying in the world, everybody stopped flying, everyone, why we would reduce global greenhouse gas emissions only 1.5%. We should do that, but it's only 1.5% of global greenhouse. Next, if all of us gave up meat to the maximum amount, and remember Tanzania, in many places it's quite arid, they can't grow vegetables and so on. But if we gave up the maximum amount average around the world, we would only save 7% of total greenhouse gas emissions. So now we're up to 8.5%. The point is we have to take all of these good ideas and put them together in one national law for all the countries so that all those actions add up to a national limit. Why? Because we really monitor the nations. We can't adequately monitor their towns, individual actions, so forth. Next slide. Okay, now how do we do this? I'm a physicist, so I can tell you we are a closed mass system on Earth. We get very few imports of mass, like some sort of imports from asteroids hitting us or anything else. The last time we got anything by man, by deliberate import, was 50 years ago. The astronauts brought back a miserably small 382 kilograms of moon rocks. 382 kilograms, that's all we've imported. So therefore, we've got to watch our resource consumption. We only have what we have. And therefore, the first law, so to speak, that we have to make is extract the very fewest natural resources possible. So that means not only do we have to leave coal in the ground, we have to virtually leave everything in the ground, right? Just leave it there, don't touch it unless you really need it. The second law is that we should make the best products, all the products, our shirts, our chairs, our cars, everything else should be the best. And that means no fossil fuels. Fossil fuel products are not the best. The second principle is that they must be lasting, right? We must spread it out in time. If we make a car, it should last 100 years or something. If we make a bridge, it should last 300 years. That's the idea, because there's a law called entropy. And that means if you dig it out of the ground, you reduce its utility. Every time you move it, its utility goes down. Therefore, make things that last. The third principle is we ought to share it, because that increases its utility. If one person uses something, that's no good. 2 people, 3 people, 4 people. That's why the bicycle sharing and scooter sharing and everything is good. We're not doing the lasting part. We got to do that. Now, of course, we should be recycling. Everything should be recyclable. But hang on to your hat. Do you know what the global recycling rate is? Which is to say that if we take something, we use it, and then we recycle it back into part of a new product, it is a miserably small 0.7%. Most of what's called recycling is burning it for energy, and that's cheating. When we say cyclical, we mean it goes right back into another product. Finally, population reduction. Now, population reduction is interesting because if you go to what I told you about comparing Sweden and Tanzania, if you reduce just one Swede's population, just one Swedish person's population, in terms of emissions, in terms of stopping climate change, reduce one Swede population and you would have to go to Africa and stop the population of 46 Africans. That's right, one Swede equals 46 Africans in terms of lifetime emissions. So reducing population is great. Always remember to add in the consumption whack, so to speak. Next slide. Now, this is from my movie Woodstock, which may have been seen by more people. It's been seen by billions of people. It's an Oscar-winning movie and so forth. It was very influential in terms of the beginning of the anti-consuming movement, because what destroys nature? Mainly it's destroyed by consumption, all sorts of consumption, every bit of consumption, right? Look at this picture. Where are products in that shot? There are virtually no products in the shot, right? Except this boy has glasses on. And the whole point is that Mark Zuckerberg has the best scientists in the world, Facebook, right, who knows more about psychology than anyone. And Mark Zuckerberg's scientists know that happiness for human beings is first humans, activities, and nature. Those are the things we really love. That's what we really want. And then it's a trick that Mark pulls on us to want other people, and then he sells his products, right? Next slide. Now, how do we pay for this? Well, what I would suggest to you is do a hashtag, how much do you love me, Mom and Dad? Remember, it's the adults, the parents who vote. So, take this idea here. If you go back to world wars or even local domestic wars, to survive against an enemy generally costs around 50% of GDP. For a nation to win, or to win in World War II with Churchill and so on. Way more than 50. Now, 1% of GDP, which is the maximum that any country around Europe, any rich country is going to spend. That's what they intend to spend. They're not even spending that now. But that's the maximum that they intend to spend for the future, for climate change. That is equal to the cost of 1 cup of coffee from Starbucks per person per day. It's nothing. So what the kids should be saying to their parents, including Greta to her own parents, hey, Mom and Dad, how much do you love me as voters? Then get out there and demand that you can keep 90% of GDP for the present and for ourselves, but allocate 10% of it. to save the future. And Spain should do that too. The electorate rules. They've got to demand that Pedro and Teresa and all those people to get elected, your good socialist party here, for them to be elected, the voters have got to support this. And I'm telling you, if Spanish kids go out there and say, hey man, Mom and Dad, vote for 10% of GDP, how much do you love me? Next slide. Now here are the people who have got to lead. These are the Northern European countries, the Scandinavian countries, and Birgit's country, the Netherlands. They are the richest, they are the most progressive, they're the most educated, so they're the ones who have to lead. And if you go on the website, you can find everyone's number. Next slide. And now we'll look at Spain. Here's Spain right here. Here you are among the biggest countries in Europe. Notice that you are the best. Everybody has to reduce their consumption about 3%. Notice you're increasing your consumption, that's the little number over here, by 2%. Therefore, you got to face it. Remember what I said, we can knock those products down and be very happy. All we have to do is make products that last and are shared. That's the big secret. Next, if you look, you're the best in terms of reducing CO2. For 2 degrees C, you have to reduce it 5%. Now remember, this is with no overshoot and no negative emissions. That's why it's so high. And for 1.5, you have to reduce it 18%. I suggest to you, if you can get the voters to vote for 10% of GDP, you have no problem. No problem at all. You can do it in a shot. Aren't the kids worth 10%? Really, think about it. Next slide. Now here are the others. You'll notice that Australia and Canada are way above. They got to whack it down 48%, 49%. They are way, way above Europe in terms of bad behavior, consuming behavior and emitting behavior. Next slide. United States, my own country, is really, really terrible. Now I have to tell you, we can only beat up Trump so far. I know John Kerry very well. I've known him my whole lifetime, and Obama. They brought to the Paris Agreement 1/6 of what USA was responsible for. Obama's emissions were way, way below the responsibility of Americans. Of course, we must get rid of Trump. We must vote a Democrat into office. But then Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden or whoever it is has got to get real, because everyone around the world knows our emissions. We can't trick them. We really can't trick them. So these numbers have got to be on the table, or we're just kidding ourselves. As I said, it's sort of like we want to make a deal on fishing, right? We want to make it so the fish don't go extinct. Now imagine then, if we hide from the information how much each country is fishing, how many fish they're catching. That's what we're doing when we keep the emissions off the table. Nobody knows. Now they're making a deal, and they have no idea what the figures are. Next slide. Now here are the very high developed, very high, medium, low, and so forth. Now remember, the ones in the red country, which are the highest of the very high developed, we have got to lead, because we set the standard of the world. We have to lead. We may be small in the number of emissions, but that doesn't matter. We are what everyone wants to be. Next slide. Now, remember, please go to our website. You can find all of these things that are in little posters. Then you can find an alphabetized list. You can get every country and compare them. It's a wonderful educational tool for adults, not just for children, right? And then finally, you can take any two nations. If you want to compare Spain to any nation, you just pull them together, and then people can quickly see why the reductions are different. Next slide. Okay, this is the last slide that's important, and then I'll finish. This is a great learning tool for adults and children. Imagine we live on a small planet where instead of having 7.7 billion people, we only have 77 or 770, right? We can beat the problem immediately. If you shrink down the planet and just think about it as a problem among people, right? Then you get to a very simple conclusion. We only have 3 numbers to deal with. We are a small planet. To survive, we must reduce our natural resource consumption to 7 tons per person per year by 2050, and reduce our CO2 emissions per person to a 2,100-year total, 32 for 1.5, 177 for 2C. It's really, really simple. Think of it as a small planet, and then you won't get confused, and you can sort it out in your own brain. After all, Albert Einstein, next slide. Albert, is famous for his thought problems, right? And he would do that. He said, if you want to whack it down, go down to the small entity. Remember, we only have 2 problems. Only 2, not 1. The first is natural resource consumption. The second is greenhouse gas emissions. And the laws of man are never superior to the laws of Mama Nature. They got to obey or we won't survive. Thanks very much. Questions? Anybody got some questions? No? I've dazzled you with brilliance and not baffled you with bullshit? Or is it the latter? That was W.C. Fields. I used to have a poster of him on my wall as my ideal. Anyone? Okay. Well, we'll be here afterwards in any case. I want to thank Teresa Ribera. We're here because she invited us. I think you've got the best environmental minister in the world, really. She's an environmental lawyer. She knows what she's talking about. She's been in the trenches all those years. She was a university professor. Hey man, look at the other political appointments around the world. They don't know what they're talking about. Teresa does. So let's give her an applause. And let's all support her. And Pedro. By the way, a last point for you all. Woodstock in 1901 in America was where the Socialist Party was founded. So Woodstock has always been a very left-wing idea in America. Thank you. Sorry. No?